Isabel Tan had been up since dawn, her desk at the corner of the Windsor Group's sleek penthouse office piled high with swatches, menus, and seating charts for the upcoming 50th wedding anniversary gala of Richard and Eleanor Windsor. The event was meant to be a masterpiece, 50 years of love and empire building celebrated in front of family, friends, and the city's most influential figures. As the company's CFO and daughter-in-law to the legendary Windsor family, Isabel took pride in making every detail flawless. She sipped her coffee, scrolling through her notes on the shared family iPad, cross-referencing guest lists with the catering schedule. A soft chime interrupted her concentration. The iPad screen flashed with a new email notification. It wasn't her account, it was Daniel's. She almost ignored it, but the subject line snagged her attention. "Can't wait to feel you again." The sender's name, Clara, made her stomach tighten. Clara Bennett, Daniel's sister-in-law, married to his older brother Lucas, was the family's golden socialite. Isabel tapped the screen before her brain could stop her. The message opened to a string of emails, unfiltered and raw. Explicit photos, intimate promises, references to hotel rooms in cities they'd visited for business. Isabel's breath caught as she scrolled further. Miami, Chicago, Paris. Trips she thought were client meetings had been trysts. Clara's words dripped with smug confidence. Isabel's too busy being the perfect daughter-in-law to notice. She loves her spreadsheets more than her husband. Her hands didn't shake, and her coffee cup didn't clatter back onto the saucer. Instead, she kept scrolling, each swipe slicing deeper. The affair wasn't a fling. It was a calculated, year-long deception wrapped in the respectable cover of corporate travel. The realization didn't come in one shattering moment. It seeped in, cold and steady, until it filled her lungs. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Daniel appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit and the silk tie she'd given him for their last anniversary. "Early start?" he asked with his usual charming smile. "Still perfecting the gala?" "Yes," Isabel replied smoothly, closing the iPad and stacking fabric samples as if nothing had happened. "Your parents deserve the very best." He stepped closer, kissing her cheek, his cologne wrapping around her. "I've got that client trip next week. Miami. I'll be gone 3 days. Clara's handling the presentations." Isabel forced a small, approving nod. "I'm sure she is." As he left for the office, she stood perfectly still, the hum of the city outside her window a dull roar in her ears. The truth was no longer a suspicion or a shadow. It was documented in full-color photos and time-stamped messages. For over a year, Daniel and Clara had not only betrayed their spouses, but had used the family business, her business, as their personal smokescreen. By the time she gathered her things and headed out, Isabel's mind was no longer fixed on gala linens and floral arrangements. She was calculating, step by step, how to turn this discovery into something far greater than confrontation. If Daniel and Clara thought they'd hidden their affair behind boardrooms and hotel doors, they had underestimated her entirely. She didn't just know about the betrayal now. She had the first pieces of evidence. And evidence, Isabel knew, was power. If you want, I can now continue with Chapter 2, The Calm Before the Storm, in the same long-flowing narrative style, so the plot keeps building at a steady pace. The morning after she'd uncovered the truth, Isabel moved through her routine as if nothing had changed. She made breakfast, kissed Daniel goodbye at the door, and reminded him not to forget his parents' gift for the gala. Her tone was warm, her smile practiced, but every gesture was deliberate. Inside, she was already at work on something much bigger than anyone suspected. By the time she reached the Windsor Group's headquarters, she had decided on her first move. If she confronted Daniel too soon, he would deny everything and cover his tracks. If she went to Lucas without proof, she risked shattering the family without ending the deception. What she needed was irrefutable evidence, something that wouldn't just reveal the affair, but expose the rot underneath it. Her office, with its glass walls and view over Midtown, felt colder that morning. Across the atrium, she could see Daniel laughing on a call in his corner suite, his body relaxed in the same way it always was after he'd gotten away with something. Clara's desk was just one floor below in the marketing department, currently empty. She'd sent out a message about working from home that day. Isabel knew what that meant. She unlocked her computer and opened the accounting software she'd managed for years. As CFO, she had access to every financial detail of the company's operations. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Travel expenses billed as client meetings in cities where no clients existed, luxury hotel stays filed under conference lodging, restaurant bills labeled as team dinners for teams that didn't exist. At noon, Isabel sent a short message to Sophia Grant, head of HR, and one of the few people in the company she trusted completely. Coffee after work? Need to discuss something sensitive. Sophia's reply was instant. I thought you'd never ask. They met at a small cafe tucked between two office towers, a place quiet enough for private conversations. Sophia arrived with her usual no-nonsense expression, her sharp eyes already reading Isabel's face. "This is about Clara, isn't it?" she said without preamble. Isabel slid her phone across the table. The screen was filled with a few choice screenshots from the emails she'd found. Sophia scrolled through them slowly, her lips tightening. "I knew she was manipulative," she said finally. "But this..." She shook her head. "You're telling me this has been going on for over a year?" "Over a year," Isabel confirmed. "And I think they've been using company resources to cover it up. I've already found questionable expense reports, and I haven't even scratched the surface." Sophia's jaw set. "She's been stealing credit for other people's work too. I've had 3 designers quit in the last 6 months because their ideas kept mysteriously becoming Clara's brilliant campaigns. And Daniel's been shielding her." "That's what I need your help with," Isabel said, leaning forward. "If we can connect the affair to fraud and workplace misconduct, there won't be a way for either of them to talk their way out. I want this to be undeniable. I want them to face every consequence they've earned." Sophia nodded slowly, the kind of nod that meant a line had been crossed and there was no going back. "Then we start tonight. I'll pull the HR complaints, everyone that mentions Clara or Daniel. You keep digging into the financials. And Isabel..." "Yes? When this blows up, it's going to take half the company's leadership down with them. You ready for that?" Isabel's expression didn't waver. "If it means clearing out the rot, then yes, I'm ready." They spent the next hour outlining a plan, careful to keep their conversation low and their movements subtle. Isabel would work from home for the next few days, citing gala preparations as an excuse, giving her uninterrupted time to sift through financial records. Sophia would quietly reach out to former employees who had left under suspicious circumstances, offering them a chance to speak off the record. As Isabel walked back to the office that evening, the city lights flickering on around her, she realized the most dangerous part of this wasn't what she had discovered, it was how easy it had been to find. Daniel and Clara had grown so comfortable, so convinced they were untouchable, that they'd left a trail anyone with the right access could follow. By the time she reached her apartment that night, she had already copied entire folders of expense reports onto an encrypted drive. The emails, the receipts, the meeting logs, they were no longer just evidence of betrayal. They were the first threads of a much bigger story. And Isabel intended to pull every single one. 2 days later, Isabel found herself sitting at a corner table in a quiet Upper East Side cafe, the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the low hum of background music and the clinking of porcelain cups. Across from her sat Natalie Windsor, Lucas's younger sister, whose sharp mind and blunt honesty had made her something of an outlier in the Windsor family. Natalie arrived in a fitted navy coat, her expression curious but cautious. "Your message sounded serious," she said as she settled into the chair. "And when you said private, I assumed it wasn't about centerpieces for the gala." "It's not," Isabel replied, sliding a folder from her bag and placing it on the table. "This stays between us for now." Natalie opened it, flipping through a handful of printed emails, expense reports, and still images from security footage. Her brows knit together as she took in the photos. Daniel and Clara together in hotel lobbies, identical dinner receipts from different cities, notes from supposed client meetings that never happened. She lingered on the emails, Clara's words dripping with condescension about Isabel's perfect wife routine. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharper, colder. "I knew something was off," Natalie said. "Clara's always been too interested in Daniel. And Lucas, he's been so trusting, too trusting." She closed the folder and exhaled slowly. "This isn't just an affair, is it?" "No," Isabel said. "They've been using the company to fund their trips, charging hotels, meals, even spa treatments as business expenses. And that's not the worst of it. Clara has stolen entire campaigns from junior staff, claimed them as her own, and gotten bonuses for work she didn't do. Daniel's signed off on every one." Natalie's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Lucas will be devastated, but he needs to know." "He will," Isabel assured her, "at the right time and in the right way. If we do this carefully, we can make sure they can't spin it or bury it. The anniversary gala will have the entire family, the board of directors, and even some media. We can make the truth public, so public they can't hide from it." For a moment, Natalie said nothing. She stirred her coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the cup. "You're talking about blowing this open in front of everyone," she said finally. "That will change everything, not just for them, for the company, the family name. They changed everything the moment they started using the family business as their cover," Isabel said quietly. "All I'm doing is making sure everyone sees it." Natalie nodded once, decisively. "Then you'll have my help, whatever you need." Over the next hour, they worked through the logistics. Natalie could get Isabel access to certain family archives that were normally locked away. Photographs from company events, recordings from holiday parties, anything that might show Daniel and Clara together when they shouldn't have been. Isabel would handle the financial evidence and cross-reference it with dates and locations. Sophia would keep building the HR case in the background, ensuring that former employees' testimonies were ready if needed. By the time they parted, Isabel's plan had taken on a new shape. It wasn't just about presenting the affair. It would be about laying out a pattern of behavior so blatant that no one could dismiss it as a private matter. Fraud, theft, harassment, abuse of power, every line crossed would be shown in sequence, with proof no one could refute. Back in her office that afternoon, Isabel closed the blinds and began her deep dive into the company's internal archives. Every transaction Daniel and Clara had signed off on went into a spreadsheet: dates, amounts, descriptions, and the suspiciously overlapping timelines with their supposed business trips. Then she moved to the creative department's shared drives, where she found original drafts of campaigns credited to Clara but authored by others, ideas submitted by junior designers whose contracts had been quietly terminated. The more she uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. It wasn't carelessness. It was a deliberate, sustained scheme to siphon resources, take credit, and silence anyone who might expose them. And they had done it all under the protection of the Windsor name. When she finally shut down her computer for the night, the spreadsheet was over 30 pages long, the evidence folder almost too large to email. She stored everything on an encrypted drive and locked it in her desk. The gala was still weeks away, but Isabel could already see it in her mind. The glittering chandeliers, the expectant faces, the hushed shock as truth replaced illusion. If Daniel and Clara thought they had perfected the art of deceit, they were about to learn how much more precise Isabel could be when it came to delivering a public reckoning. Eleanor Windsor didn't often request private meetings. When she did, it was never without purpose. The next day, Isabel arrived at the Rosemont Club's private dining room a few minutes early. The space was as meticulously arranged as the woman who commanded it. Polished mahogany, crystal water glasses, a vase of white orchids in the center of the table. Eleanor entered moments later, her posture straight, her eyes sharp beneath the sweep of her silver hair. She was dressed in a deep emerald suit that seemed to hum with authority. "Isabel," she greeted, kissing her cheek. "You look well." "You too, Eleanor." Isabel kept her tone neutral, though her pulse quickened. They sat, and a waiter appeared to pour their drinks. Eleanor ordered a glass of Chardonnay, Isabel a sparkling water. When they were alone again, Eleanor leaned back, studying her. "You've been busy lately, more than usual." "I have," Isabel admitted carefully. Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "I've been watching Daniel and Clara for some time. There's been a change, a tension. They think they're subtle, but I didn't spend 20 years as this company's CFO without learning how to read people and numbers." Isabel hesitated, then reached into her bag and placed a slim folder on the table. "I think it's time you see this." Eleanor opened it slowly. Inside were printouts of emails, travel records, falsified expense reports, and copies of stolen campaign proposals. She turned each page without comment, her expression tightening slightly with every detail. When she reached the hotel receipts and overlapping meeting schedules, she set the folder down and took a long sip of wine. "So," she said finally, "it's as bad as I thought. Worse, in fact." "I've been collecting this for weeks," Isabel said. "Sophia in HR is gathering employee complaints, and Natalie's helping me get older company records. I want to make sure there's no way they can twist the truth." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, though her voice remained calm. "And your endgame?" "The anniversary gala," Isabel replied. "Everyone will be there, the family, the board, the press. I want them to see what Daniel and Clara have done. Not just to me and Lucas, but to this company, to its people, to its reputation." Eleanor set down her glass. "Good, because you won't be doing it alone." She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "I have friends in finance, people who control the flow of capital in this city. I have cousins who own media outlets that can make or break a reputation overnight. And I have former colleagues in government who take corporate fraud very seriously. If we move together, we can ensure that when this breaks, it's not just gossip, it's a matter of public record." Isabel felt the air shift between them, as if an unspoken alliance had just been sealed. "Why tell me this now?" "Because," Eleanor said, "I needed to be sure you had the resolve. Many people discover betrayal and crumble under it. You've kept your composure, you've planned. That's the kind of discipline this family needs if we're going to protect the Windsor name." A waiter arrived with their meals, but neither touched the plates. Eleanor began outlining her role in the plan. She would quietly alert her contacts in banking to begin freezing suspicious accounts once the evidence went public. Her cousin at the Tribune would prepare an investigative feature to run the morning after the gala. Trusted lawyers would be on standby to handle the fallout inside the company. "When the truth comes out," she said, "Daniel and Clara won't just lose their standing here. They'll lose any foothold they have in this city." Isabel nodded slowly. "Then it's settled." Eleanor smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of a general preparing for a decisive battle. "Enjoy the rest of your day, Isabel. From here on, we move as one." When Isabel left the Rosemont Club, the winter sun was bright on the sidewalks and the air felt sharper, cleaner. She no longer felt like she was carrying the weight of this alone. Eleanor's support didn't just strengthen her plan. It guaranteed that when the moment came, the exposure would be swift, brutal, and impossible to ignore. That night, as she reviewed another batch of forged expense claims at her desk, Isabel felt a rare sense of calm. The storm was coming. Yes, but now she knew she wouldn't be facing it by herself. "If you want, I can continue straight into Chapter 5. turning the screw with the same flowing pace where Isabel and Eleanor start putting pressure on Daniel and Clara without them realizing the walls are closing in. Long afternoons in her glass-walled office refining budgets for the anniversary gala. Daniel would drop in sometimes, leaning casually against her doorway, making small talk about table arrangements or guest lists. Clara would send the occasional email full of polite suggestions for floral colors or menu tweaks, as if nothing between them had shifted. Behind that polished surface, however, a quiet and calculated operation was underway. Every evening, Isabel and Eleanor spoke in coded phone calls or met in Eleanor's study at the Windsor estate. Together, they built a network, Sophia in HR gathering the suppressed complaints, Natalie digging into old archives, Eleanor's contacts in the media and finance circling like hawks. The testimonies started trickling in first. A former junior designer named Amanda, who had left the Windsor group after her campaign was revised by Clara into something unrecognizable, sat in Isabel's apartment one evening, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. She told me if I ever said anything, I'd never work in this industry again, Amanda said, her voice trembling. Isabel took careful notes, sliding a non-disclosure agreement across the table to reassure her that her statement would be handled with discretion until the right moment. Then there was Paul from the events department, who'd been pushed out after questioning Clara's expense claims for a supposed client networking retreat in Aspen. There were no clients, he said flatly. It was just her and Daniel, and the receipts were obscene. Thousands of dollars in wine alone. Each account was documented, signed, and added to a growing file. Eleanor reviewed them like pieces of a puzzle, fitting them neatly alongside the financial evidence Isabel had been compiling. Every name, every date, every amount, they'll have nowhere to hide, Eleanor said one night as she flipped through the pages. Isabel, meanwhile, played her part to perfection. She approved every gala request Daniel or Clara suggested, no matter how excessive. A 12-piece string ensemble? Of course. Imported orchids from Singapore? Why not? It's their golden anniversary. Clara seemed especially pleased by Isabel's compliance, mistaking it for distraction. The truth was, every approval became another entry in Isabel's ledger, a neat record of wasteful spending that tied back to Clara's department and Daniel's sign-off. Even the entertainment budget, which had nearly doubled in a week, was traced through invoices issued to a shell company connected to one of Clara's acquaintances. She began planting small suggestions, too, subtle prompts that made them dig the hole deeper. Maybe we should have a champagne fountain in the foyer, she said lightly to Clara during a meeting. Something elegant. Your department can handle it. Clara's eyes lit up at the chance to impress. 2 days later, Isabel had the invoice, overpriced and misfiled, just as she expected. Daniel was even easier to manipulate. A casual mention of how relaxed he looked lately or how grateful she was for his help with the gala, and he would offer to take on more responsibilities. Every one of those tasks led him to approve inflated vendor contracts, all of which Isabel quietly copied and stored. By mid-month, the evidence file had become a fortress. Emails, bank records, witness statements, and now a pristine trail of recent spending tied directly to both Daniel and Clara. The most damning pieces were the ones that linked gala funds to a Miami hotel reservation for the week after the event, billed to the company as executive planning meetings. One night, as she sat in her apartment cross-referencing those invoices with the gala's official budget, Isabel received a text from Daniel. "You've outdone yourself, Izzy. This gala is going to be unforgettable." She stared at the words for a long moment before typing back, "That's the plan." In truth, Daniel wasn't wrong. The anniversary gala would be unforgettable, just not for the reasons he imagined. And with every careless approval and every arrogant assumption, he and Clara were helping Isabel design the perfect stage for their undoing. Isabel walked into the executive boardroom that morning with a leather folder under her arm. Eleanor beside her in a navy suit that seemed to absorb the light. They had agreed the night before. Today would be the first strike. The long mahogany table was already filled with board members, department heads, and both Daniel and Clara seated strategically apart. Daniel looked relaxed, tapping his pen against the table as if this were any other meeting. Clara wore her most polished smile, a silk blouse and pearl earrings, framing an expression of calm control. Neither knew what was coming. Eleanor opened the meeting with a clipped announcement. Before we begin our regular agenda, there is an urgent matter that must be addressed. Her voice carried the authority of decades in the company. She nodded toward Isabel. The CFO will present findings from a recent internal review. Isabel stood, sliding printed packets across the table to each member. The finance department has completed a preliminary audit of expense reports, departmental budgets, and vendor contracts over the last 18 months, she said evenly. We have identified multiple irregularities, misclassified expenses, inflated vendor invoices, and transactions that have no documented business purpose. There was a rustle of paper as the board members opened their folders. On the first page, clear as daylight, were side-by-side comparisons of official records and the true charges. Luxury hotel stays listed as client meetings, private dinners labeled as staff training sessions, and most recently, gala-related contracts billed at twice their market rate. Daniel leaned back in his chair, forcing a chuckle. This must be a mistake. Isabel, you know how these reports can get clerical errors, miscommunication between departments. Isabel met his eyes without blinking. These aren't clerical errors. Each transaction was approved with your signature, Daniel, and in many cases also approved by Clara. Clara's smile tightened. If my name appears on those documents, it's because I was following standard procedure. I don't personally verify every vendor's invoice. No one in my position does. Except, Eleanor said smoothly, when the vendor happens to be linked to a personal acquaintance of yours, or when the expense corresponds exactly with your own travel records. For example, she flipped a page. This $14,000 billed to a consulting firm in Miami. There was no consulting session. What there was, however, was a weekend reservation at the Ocean Palms Resort, under both your names. The room went still. Daniel straightened in his chair, his charm faltering. This is being blown out of proportion. Whatever these discrepancies are, they can be explained. I'm sure they can, Isabel replied, her tone cool, and you'll have the opportunity to do so during the investigation. Murmurs spread through the room. A senior board member cleared his throat. What exactly are you recommending? Effective immediately, Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on both Daniel and Clara. Daniel Windsor and Clara Bennett are suspended from their duties pending the outcome of the full audit. Their access to company accounts and facilities will be restricted. Clara's composure cracked for the first time. Suspended? Without even giving us the chance to. You've had 18 months to operate without scrutiny, Eleanor interrupted. That grace period is over. Daniel looked from Eleanor to Isabel, his voice taking on a pleading edge. Izzy, we're family. You can't. But Isabel was already gathering her notes. This isn't about family. It's about the company's integrity. Security arrived quietly at the back of the room, standing just inside the door. Daniel and Clara exchanged a glance, half shock, half calculation, before rising from their seats. They left without another word, their polished shoes clicking against the polished floor in an oddly hollow rhythm. When the door closed behind them, Eleanor turned to the board. The full findings will be presented soon. For now, the priority is containment and ensuring the gala proceeds without disruption. Isabel sat down, her folder closed but still warm in her hands. She had deliberately left out the most damning pieces. The explicit emails, the witness testimonies, the charity fund diversions. Those were locked away, waiting for the perfect moment. In 3 days, under the glittering lights of the gala, every detail would be laid bare. And when that happened, there would be no misunderstandings, no room for charm, and no chance for either Daniel or Clara to talk their way out. Isabel's phone began lighting up in relentless waves. First came the calls from Daniel, voicemails thick with charm, then with frustration, and finally with quiet desperation. "We can fix this, Izzy. Just meet with me. Don't do anything you'll regret." She let every call go unanswered. By 9 o'clock, she was home, sitting at her dining table with a glass of water and her laptop open to the final gala seating chart when the buzzer rang. She checked the camera feed. Daniel, standing in the lobby of her building, his tie loosened, his expression pale but determined. Against her better judgment, she went down to meet him in the vestibule, keeping the glass door between them. "Please," he said, pressing hand to the glass, "you're overreacting. This thing with Clara, it's not what you think. We made mistakes, yes, but suspensions, public humiliation, we can make a deal." "There's nothing to deal," Isabel said, her voice even. "The audit speaks for itself. You and Clara did this." He lowered his voice. "What if I resign quietly? Walk away, keep the family out of it. You can have anything you want, money, properties. Just cancel whatever you're planning for the gala." She almost laughed at the transparency of it. "Daniel, you still think this is about bargaining. It's not. It's about the truth. And the truth is going to come out." When she refused to buzz him in, he lingered a few more minutes, then turned away, shoulders slumped. The next day, it was Clara's turn. Her calls began mid-morning, sugary at first. Compliments about the gala decor, reminders of good times they'd shared at family holidays, before shifting to veiled threats. "Isabel, you don't want to destroy this family's name. Think about Lucas. Think about Richard and Eleanor. If this presentation goes ahead, no one wins." By late afternoon, Sophia appeared at Isabel's office door, holding her phone with a tight-lipped smile. "You'll want to hear this," she said, playing back a recording. It was a conversation between Clara and one of the AV technicians for the gala venue. Clara's voice was smooth, coaxing, offering cash in exchange for a little access to the control system, just to make sure things run smoothly. "She tried to bribe him," Sophia said. "He refused and reported it straight to me." "Good," Isabel replied. "That's one more piece of evidence." Eleanor was informed immediately, and by the end of the day, the gala's security plan had been overhauled. 2 additional guards were assigned to the AV room, and the presentation files were moved to an encrypted system accessible only to Isabel, Eleanor, and the head technician. Backups were stored off-site in case of a last-minute sabotage attempt. That evening, Natalie called with another update. "Clara's been trying to charm her way past some of Dad's old friends in the media, hoping they'll run a sympathetic piece before the gala. No one's biting." "They won't," Isabel said. "Not once they see what we have." The pressure from Daniel and Clara didn't stop. Daniel sent flowers to Isabel's office the next morning with a handwritten note, "One last chance to end this quietly." Clara followed with an email, this one full of emotional appeals. How she never meant for things to go this far, and how Isabel could still choose to be merciful. Isabel read them both once, then slid them into the growing evidence file. Every word they sent now was just more proof of their desperation. By the second night, she no longer saw their attempts as threats. They were confirmation that the walls were closing in, and that Daniel and Clara were beginning to understand the one thing they had never believed possible, that they were about to lose. Crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over gilded tables, towering arrangements of white roses and orchids perfuming the air, a string quartet filling the space with soft, elegant music. Waiters in black jackets circulated with trays of champagne, their movements as precise as the planning that had gone into the night. Guests arrived in a steady stream, business leaders in tailored suits, socialites in floor-length gowns, family members greeting each other with warm smiles and air kisses. It was the sort of event that made the Windsor name gleam brighter, a public display of stability and legacy. Only a few people in the room knew the truth simmering beneath the polished surface. Isabel moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her dark evening gown fitting her like armor. She greeted guests, posed for photos, and made sure no one suspected what was about to happen. Across the room, she caught sight of Daniel entering alone. His usual charm was dimmed, his smile was tight, his eyes scanning for allies. Moments later, Clara appeared at the opposite entrance, every inch the poised socialite in a shimmering silver dress, but her stiff posture betrayed her tension. Eleanor, regal in deep sapphire, was already working quietly in the background. At her signal, 2 discreet security guards positioned themselves near the exits. She had made sure that once the program began, no one, especially Daniel and Clara, would be able to slip away unnoticed. Natalie and Sophia handled the technical side, coordinating with the AV team to confirm the presentation was cued and locked. 3 cameras were set up around the ballroom, recording every angle for posterity, and later, for the media outlets Eleanor's contacts controlled. As the last of the guests found their seats, Richard Windsor stepped onto the small stage, his voice rich and warm as he welcomed everyone. Tonight, we celebrate 50 years of love, partnership, and building something that has stood the test of time. Applause rolled through the room, glasses clinked, and Richard gestured toward Eleanor with a smile. "My wife has a surprise for all of you." Eleanor took the microphone, her smile serene. "In honor of this milestone, we've prepared a tribute to our family, our history, our achievements, and our commitment to each other." She glanced at Isabel, who gave a slight nod. "Please enjoy." The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the ballroom. The first images appeared on the massive screen, a montage of black and white photographs from the Windsor couple's early years, their first office, their children as toddlers. Laughter and soft murmurs rippled through the crowd as the memories played out. But as the slideshow moved forward in time, the tone shifted almost imperceptibly. Photos from company events began to show patterns. Daniel and Clara standing just a little too close, eyes meeting in moments that no one had noticed before. Then came images from hotels and conferences, with date stamps that matched the falsified expense reports. A few whispers rose from the tables. The transitions were seamless, moving from family history into evidence without warning. Hotel receipts appeared next to corporate meeting logs that listed client sessions, which never happened. Screenshots of emails flashed briefly, enough to make the words clear. Plans for private time disguised as business obligations. The room grew stiller with each frame, the music fading into silence. Isabel stood near the edge of the stage, watching not the screen, but the faces in the crowd. Guests leaned forward, expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief. Across the room, Daniel's shoulders tensed, and Clara's hand gripped the edge of her tablecloth. Both had gone pale. Eleanor's gaze moved between them, her expression unreadable, but her presence unmistakably commanding. The doors were watched, the cameras were rolling, and the truth was unfolding in front of everyone who had ever mattered to them. And the presentation had only just begun. But then the screen faded to black for a heartbeat, and when the next image appeared, the mood shifted instantly. A grainy still frame from hotel security footage filled the screen. Daniel and Clara stepping into an elevator together late at night, their heads bent close in conversation. A timestamp in the corner matched a date from a supposedly critical client meeting. Murmurs swept through the tables. Another image replaced it, this time a scanned page from an expense report. The listed reason, Executive Strategy Luncheon. The actual receipt, champagne, oysters, and dessert for 2 at a private resort. As the audience processed that, side-by-side comparisons began to appear. Official company records on the left, actual hotel bookings, and restaurant bills on the right. The whispers grew louder. A man at the front table leaned to his wife, pointing at the screen. Eleanor's voice broke through the quiet, calm, but unflinching. These are not clerical errors. These are deliberate falsifications, authorized repeatedly by the same two individuals. The next segment was the most devastating. Recorded statements from former employees, faces blurred for privacy, played one after another. A designer described having her campaign stolen and being forced out. An account executive spoke of being accused of incompetence after refusing to sign off on an inflated invoice. Another employee detailed the bullying and threats that came from questioning Clara's spending. Daniel's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Clara's polished exterior had begun to crack. Her breathing was sharp, and her gaze darted toward the exits. Then came the bank records, money diverted from corporate accounts into shell companies, then funneled into personal travel and luxury purchases. Overlaying the documents were snippets of incriminating emails. Charge it to the charity budget. No one checks those line items. And make sure Isabel signs off without looking too closely. The room was silent except for the steady click of each slide changing. Finally, the last transition brought up the headline Eleanor had been waiting for. Misuse of charitable funds, documented evidence. The screen showed a list of donations collected for children's education programs, and alongside it, transfers to luxury resorts and private shopping sprees. Gasps broke out, followed by a few voices of open outrage. Guests turned to stare openly at Daniel and Clara now, no longer pretending not to notice. And then, almost imperceptibly, movement at the back of the room. Two men and a woman stepped forward, dressed like other guests but wearing discreet earpieces. They moved toward Daniel and Clara with quiet precision. One of the men produced a badge. Special Agent Carter, FBI, Daniel Windsor, Clara Bennett, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of charitable funds. The words seemed to hang in the air. Daniel started to rise, but one agent was already at his side, guiding him firmly to stand. Clara's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she backed away, shaking her head. This is insane. You can't just... Her protest was cut off as the second agent read her rights. Cameras, both the professional ones set up for the gala and the phones that guests now had in hand, captured every second. Eleanor stood tall near the stage, her expression composed. Isabel, just a few feet away, felt the collective shift in the room. The Windsor name, once a shield, was now the center of a scandal no one could deny. As the agents led Daniel and Clara toward the exit, the guests parted in tense silence, the weight of what they'd just witnessed settling heavily over the glittering room. The chandeliers still sparkled, the champagne still flowed, but the night had turned into something far more unforgettable than anyone had imagined. And for Isabel, it was only the beginning of the reckoning. The shock of that night had given way to something more solid, rebuilding, reform, and a determination to turn a public scandal into a defining moment of change. Daniel and Clara's trials had moved quickly. The mountain of evidence presented left little room for negotiation. Both had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Their sentences were long enough to ensure they would spend years behind bars. And their personal assets, homes, investments, luxury items, had been seized by court order. From those seized funds, Eleanor and Isabel had launched the Windsor Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and helping victims of workplace abuse rebuild their careers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that this new lifeline for others was born directly from the greed and cruelty that had once tainted the company's top ranks. Inside the Windsor Group, the transformation was visible in every corner. Departments once run on fear and favoritism now operated with transparency and accountability. Sophia's HR division implemented strict anti-retaliation policies, ensuring no one could be silenced for speaking up. Natalie oversaw a new mentorship program that paired senior leaders with junior employees, giving those at the bottom a direct path to develop their skills and ideas without interference. Eleanor, though no longer officially in an executive role, had become Isabel's most trusted advisor. She kept a private office on the executive floor, her presence a steady reminder that leadership meant more than holding a title. It meant protecting the integrity of the whole. "It's not about perfection," she told Isabel one afternoon, reviewing a quarterly report. "It's about proving every day that this company deserves the trust people place in it." Under Isabel's leadership, the Windsor Group's reputation began to recover faster than anyone expected. Media outlets that had once run scandal headlines now featured articles praising the company's overhaul. Major clients returned, citing the visible shift in company values. Financially, the firm was stronger than it had been in years, bolstered by public confidence and renewed partnerships. The board, once fractured, had united under Isabel's vision. Meetings were no longer exercises in political maneuvering, but focused on innovation, ethics, and sustainable growth. There was even a new clause in the company charter requiring independent audits twice a year, a safeguard Eleanor insisted upon and Isabel enforced without compromise. One bright spring morning, Isabel stood at the front of the newly renovated auditorium, addressing employees gathered for the first annual Windsor Foundation Award ceremony. Behind her, a banner read, "From Truth, Strength." She spoke about courage, about the importance of standing up even when it was difficult, and about the future they were building together. As she looked out at the faces in the crowd, some old colleagues, some new hires, she felt a sense of calm satisfaction. Later that evening, she and Eleanor shared a quiet toast in the executive lounge, the city skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You know," Eleanor said with a faint smile, "when I first asked you to lunch, I suspected you had the resolve. But I never imagined you'd lead the Windsor Group into its strongest era yet." Isabel clinked her glass against Eleanor's. They thought they could tear it apart for their own gain. Instead, they gave us the chance to rebuild it better than ever. Outside, the lights of the city stretched endlessly, each one a reminder of the reach and influence the Windsor name now carried. Not as a shield for corruption, but as a symbol of resilience and integrity. For Isabel, the revenge had never been about watching Daniel and Clara fall. It was about making sure what they had tried to destroy came back stronger, untouchable in the ways that mattered most. And standing there, with Eleanor at her side and a company reborn under her leadership, she knew that was exactly what they had achieved. The sweetest revenge, after all, was turning their betrayal into the very thing that secured her and the Windsor Group's future.